For ad-free listening, our newsletter, special deep dive episodes and members-only benefits, you can subscribe to us at that'sjustwild.com. Hello and welcome to That's Just Wild with me, Steve Backshall.
Me, Lizzie Daly.
And me, Sarah Roberts.
The podcast all about nature, wildlife, and how I once found a new species of catfish embedded in a dead crocodile's palate.
Hang on a minute, a new species?
Yeah.
What were you doing in its mouth?
Well, it was dead.
Well, that doesn't explain it.
I was doing an impromptu necropsy. I was trying to find out what had killed it. We were on an expedition, and I was lucky enough to be working with the stunning ichthyologist Phil Widdink, Professor Phil Widdink, who had the unique ability of knowing the local fauna so well that he could have a fish in his hand and go, that is a new species, something he did about half a dozen times on the expedition. He is a god. I am utterly in awe of him. Yes.
Wow.
So it choked on a catfish?
Yes, new kind of catfish.
No,
It's
it
embedded in the...
choked on it. Is that how it died?
Possible that the venomous spine on its back, the dorsal spine, may well have embedded in its upper jaw and possibly killed it. Or it could have been something else, we're not really sure.
Cool.
Today we're talking about the team players who like to move and act as one.
Oh, like politicians.
Oh, no. Definitely no, those.
I thought at least one of you would come up with a sporting analogy. Come on, there must be something out there. That as the bold Lions rugby team as they set off on their tour of Australia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or the all-female rugby team led by Iona Mayer. Do you know her? She's amazing. Anyway.
Not personally, but
okay.
Yeah. She's a beautiful Bristol, isn't she?
She is. She's a beast. Shout out to Iona.
Anyway, listen, there's so much to talk about when it comes to animal behaviour. We will get onto that. But first of all, I want to start to talk about animals who think or act as a collective. So right now, I am sat here on the banks of the Thames, and particularly at this time of year, we start to get mass emergences of insects that have spent their year, or sometimes the past 2 years, underwater as aquatic nymphs. And we get mayflies, which will come up, and they are bouncing over the surface of the water and all of the trees and bushes around, and it is their nuptial flight. It's their opportunity to breed together. And then we'll get certain kinds of caddisflies and stoneflies and alderflies, the damselflies, the demoiselles, the dragonflies, and they all come up at the same time as other members of their own species, because that is what's beneficial to do, because it's all about the breeding. And that then triggers feeding from the swifts, the swallows, the martins, the hobbies, the red kites even are sweeping down to grab a hold of them. And it just kickstarts this massive explosion in the landscape.
Absolutely epic. Have you been on the river when there's been a mayfly emergence? Because it's one of the coolest things.
I live on the river, Lizzie.
Of course you do.
I live on the river.
Of course you do. So you see it every, wherever you want. Yeah, this is the thing. It's I've never forget. I was on the Wye going to Simmons Yacht kayaking, and it was like the best day. It was just mayfly nymphs everywhere and wagtails just like bosh, mid-air, just amazing acrobatic flight, just smashing them out of the across the river. It's just awesome.
And they do this amazing bouncing flight, the mayflies, where they go up and down, down. When they drop down, they're kind of like weightless, almost like a hanky drifting down through the air. And when they're backlit with the golden light of dusk, it's one of the most glorious things you can see anywhere in the world.
Yeah, what about flying ants? Because there always seems to be every year this kind of like scaremongering in the news of flying ants just taking over the skies, and you get kind of these huge circling groups of gulls overhead. I love it. And I actually remember the flying ant day near South Wales last year, because I was running and it was just like ants just like going past me in my eyes and my nostrils. It was awesome.
Hailing them, they're getting stuck between your teeth.
Yeah. Do you remember a flying ant day?
Veneers in your case, Lizzie.
Yeah, veneers. Oh. Excuse me, Sarah. You must know of a flying ant day.
I encountered a flying ant day when I was in Bristol, and I was around a few bug people who like those kind of things, and they were telling me that sometimes some of the ants survive, so that some die and some survive after that day of flight. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, so flying ant day, it is not completely true, but there is a synchronicity there. Mm-hmm. So from the same species, from whatever trigger it might be, and that can be atmospheric, can be down to conditions, it can be down to circadian rhythms. The flying ants, the alates, the winged sexual form of that ant is going to try and be airborne at the same time as other members of the same species. I say try, it's not something that they're kind of like consciously doing, but it's there to make the mating opportunities more abundant.
So I'm right in thinking, though, the ants are walking around as usual, then one day they just sprout a bunch of wings, they fly up in the air, they maybe do their business, or do they not? And then they drop to the floor and the wings drop off. Is that right? Or do they just drop to the floor and then they're dead?
The latter part's right. The alates are a separate caste born to do that.
And that mass that you see in the air, Sarah, is a mix of future queens and males. So as Steve was saying about kind of nuptial flight, it's a whole thing where they synchronize it to then mate on the wing, which is awesome, and usually happens on like a hot and humid day, which actually triggers them all to do this. But it's, that's the goal, is essentially mate as much as they can. The males usually die off afterwards with the fertilized queens. And then, it's kind of just, that's actually a bit of a spectacle, even though we seem to vilify it in the news and people get it up their nostrils and in their eyes. But it's quite an amazing thing. And we see this kind of synchronized emergence event across the animal kingdom. One of the most famous has to be the cicadas. Question, Steve, how do you say cicadas? Cicadas or cicadas? What's your choice?
Either is fine. Either's fine.
Okay, I say personally cicadas. Sarah says cicadas.
I say tomatoes, you say tomato. Yeah,
tomatoes, potatoes.
I say cicadas. Cicadas is my one.
Yeah, cicadas. We'll go with cicadas. But so a lot of people think that all cicadas do this, and I'm sure, if you haven't heard of it, but I'm sure most people have, it's this really unique kind of life cycle of emerging every 13 or 17 years from that kind of subterranean nymph stage. So there's hundreds of species, I think 3,000 species of cicadas across the world, and you have your annual cicadas that, as normal, when the conditions are right, every year they will emerge. But periodical cicadas, of which there are many different species, have this kind of synchronized emergence. And what's incredible about it is these can be, millions, even billions strong, depending on the geography and actually when they do emerge. They will literally spend most of that life cycle underground. They'll be feeding on sap from the roots of trees. And then it takes the right soil conditions, around 18 degrees in late spring, that actually, before they actually then trigger out of their nymph stage, and then they begin that emergence. I should also say that it's not like, on the 10th of September, every 13 years to the day, that will be the only day that they emerge. It depends on their geography as well of said species and their brood, when that was actually laid as well. So it's kind of this cyclical emergence, but what's most fascinating about it is actually what triggers it. And we still don't really know why they all emerge in this way. Perhaps it's down to, they think maybe cicadas marking down freeze and thaw events throughout their life, and another suggestion is perhaps even the sap that they're eating in their nymph stage could be a signal or a trigger for when they should emerge. What do you guys think?
It's quite something when it happens, when you're there, and they will emerge, as you say, covering every branch, every bush. The noise is deafening. And then after they're gone, they leave behind these shucks or exuvia, these sort of hardened exoskeletons that they've climbed out of, and they're just hanging off everything like little plastic toys in the end of every seat. I mean, it is absolutely overwhelming when it happens, and that is the point, right? So the idea is that you emerge in such enormous numbers at one very specific time that all the predators, will fill their stomachs, but they're still not going to make an imprint on the amount of cicadas that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never seen it myself. I've always wanted to, but it's something that I can only imagine is like quite an overwhelming experience, having millions of cicadas, and the sound as well. I mean, even if you're in a forest full of cicadas, it's such a loud noise.
You spent much time in Borneo?
A little bit, yeah. I've been once.
So there is a sound that I could play to you that would instantly take you back to the forest of Borneo. They call it the 6 o'clock cicada because it sets into voice at pretty much 6 o'clock every day. When I first started going there were entomologists who said that they could set their watch by it. It was that regular. And it is this blaring fire engine wail of a sound, absolutely deafening. It gets to be 110 decibels, so about as much as a big Harley Davidson motorbike, like roaring up, revving up. And it's absolutely the sound of Borneo. And it hits you dead on that dusk time where they're in full voice. They have these little kind of cymbals on their body that they contract and vibrate at, dozens of times a second. And the sound is just absolutely overwhelming. And it is the sound of Borneo.
Yeah.
Have either of you ever been caught in a mass termite emergence, but particularly somewhere warm in a tropical rainforest?
No, I can't say I have.
I have had the mass emergence of sandflies that happen at dawn, and the mass plumes of mosquitoes as well. The dawn and dusk for me seems to be the bitiest times to be anywhere where it's kind of tropical.
So termites, which are one of the most important creatures on the planet, found in extraordinary biomass, millions and millions of tons of termites, mostly living below the surface of the soil. And they will emerge on signals that sometimes after heavy rains as the soil starts to soften, and billions of winged alate sexual forms of termites will emerge in one go. And it can be totally overwhelming, really unsettling. There is no escape from them. On expeditions we have got below our mosquito nets, and the termites will land on the mosquito nets and crawl through the holes, leaving their wings behind.
Oh, wow.
You are covered in them. There is no escape from them. Every light is just this absolute bombardment of millions and millions of flying insects. And on one particularly impressive one, when we were filming in Bhutan on Lost Land of the Tiger, we had this completely overwhelming melee of termites. And then the following morning, we got up and the entire camp was buried under this sheet of gossamer of all of their wings that had been dropped as they, headed below the surface of the soil. And everywhere you walked, you just get this almost like snow of termite wings that would just go up into the air. It was utterly magical, and one of those moments where nature just completely overwhelms you. It overwhelms your senses. The scale of it is just beyond belief. And then just hours later, it's gone. And the only memory are just billions of wings.
That sounds dreamy. I mean, it also sounds kind of terrifying, but
quite
horrific.
Dreamy. The night that it happened, it was horrific. Even Professor George McGavin, who's like, world-renowned entomologist, started off like, "This is amazing," and then after an hour, he was like, "Get me out of this nightmare." So yeah,
I can imagine it like gets into your armpits and your nostrils and everything.
Oh yeah,
Wouldn't want to know.
Since we're talking about insects, I did recently stumble upon something in the ant world. It's not a mass emergence. Instead, it's actually a really tactical, intelligent, instinctive behaviour that I had never heard of and I'm really excited about. Brown Floridian carpenter ants, so Florida carpenter ants, are one of the only species outside of humans to conduct surgeries. If the ants are found to have an injury, so either on their tibia or fibia, depending on where it is on their leg, basically, if it's up on their thigh, then they'll amputate it.
Oh, wow.
And if it's on their ankle, then they'll just clean it. And so basically what happens is you get this ant that comes back to its group, it's slightly injured, the other ants surround it, and they'll look at the wound and they'll decide whether or not it needs cleaning or amputation. And they'll go ahead if it needs to. If it's up on its higher thigh, they will actually amputate it by biting it off, and it can take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour to do. But it's really, really effective. The reason that it's so kind of interesting is the survival rates of the ants treated by other ants is super high. So the mortality rate, if they're left untreated and they're kept away from the other ants, is 15 to 40% generally. But when they're allowed to perform surgeries and go and treat and either clean the wounds, then their amputation survival rate is 90 to 95%, with them going back to work the same day. Could you imagine, after having your leg chewed off? And the clean-in survival rate is 70 to 75%. So they're just kind of these incredibly intelligent species that I don't think we give enough credit to.
I want to pick up on that because you said intelligent, and that is at the core of everything that we're talking about here. Are they intelligent? Are they intelligent? Is there a sentience here? Is there an awareness of what's going on with other, individuals within your group? Or is it something which is a big, broad structure that is created without the awareness of the individuals? I think probably the most exciting and interesting example of all of this is the leafcutter ants. So the leafcutter ants, which are ants that are found in the tropical New World, they form the most complex societies that exist in nature other than us as human beings. They will go out on foraging raids where they bring back particularly leaves and flowers. They don't eat those themselves. They use them to grow a fungus on which they feed their larvae. And they have such an incredible structure, a caste system within their societies, that they not only have workers that do all of the effort, they have the soldiers with enormous, gigantic, great butt-like heads that drive these mandibles that they can use to protect the workers. They even have a specific caste of ant called the minim that sits on the head or on the sail of the leaf being carried by a worker, and their sole job is to protect workers from parasitic flies that will come in and lay eggs into their heads that make their heads drop off. And this whole society, which functions in the most incredibly efficient manner, is happening with individual insects, all of which have a brain, if you can even call their collection of neurons a brain, that you couldn't stick a pin into. It's so tiny. And that to me is the most fascinating thing in nature. Are they though intelligent? I don't know. That's a big question.
I love that question, and it's an important one to ask because more often than not, well across many species and in different cases, we're seeing how cooperation can actually be a massive benefit, both in reproductive success, but also in survival, in ways that you just never get from that kind of selfish trait. And on a very kind of more scientific, nerdy kind of what are the drivers of this behaviour, from an evolutionary or behavioural perspective, there's kin selection, exactly what you're talking about. It's for the colony. It's passing on genes, indirectly promoting the support for others that you're related to. Almost selfless behaviour that we see in a lot of our eusocial insects, and we've already talked a little bit about that. There's reciprocal altruism, which can arise between unrelated individuals. And that whole idea is like tit for tat care. It's a strategy that's kind of common in species that have that intelligence, primates and dolphins, more complex social structures. You've got mutualism. I know we touched on this before, but mutualism is a great example. Cleaner fish, or you might find it in pollinators, bees pollinating flowers, and then as a result getting food resource. And then there's group living benefits as well. So again, we've talked a little bit about the cicadas and how they benefit by overwhelming predators, but all these different strategies support cooperation being a big part of kind of that evolutionary and adaptive process day to day. So is it intelligence? I don't know, but I'd say it's probably a mix.
There's a really intriguing element to all of this, which is the kind of eusocial paradox. And it's one that really gave Darwin a really hard time. It was one of the elements of entomology that he struggled with most, which was how can, in this gene-centered theory of how evolution works, how can there be entire castes of insects that are incapable of reproducing, that just do not have the ability to pass on their own genetics? How can that have evolved? And the kind of way around it that we have at the moment is this whole idea of inclusive fitness and close family fitness, and that an individual can evolve to pass on the genetics of its group, which are similar enough to its own that still fits the hypothesis. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that that kind of makes your brain bleed, and it does seem to throw a spanner into the works of all of the nice, convenient selfish gene ideas that we kind of see as underpinning everything in biology. And yet you have these whole groups of insects, and particularly the Hymenoptera, the ants, wasps and bees, and the termites on top of that as well, that could be argued to be some of the most successful organisms our planet has ever seen. And it's working together in synchronicity that allows that to happen.
Yeah. I love that we've kind of focused on exactly that for collective behaviour, because, as you say, arguably it's one of the most interesting groups to do it so well. But it does go beyond our small animals, our insects, doesn't it? Should we talk about some other bigger animals that cooperate?
I think before we put off anybody who is not mad keen on creepy crawlies and has probably already signed off on our podcast, it's quite wise that we go down that way.
I think so. I quickly want to talk about flight in birds, migration of birds. Why is there not a documentary, Steve, on just the migration of birds? And can we make that happen, please?
There was one. There was one.
Have you guys never seen Fly Away Home? What was your childhood like?
Love it. No, I'm even the migration of, hoverflies and butterflies. I want tiny cameras to just show us what that is actually like, because I find it, as a collective behaviour in reference to flight in particular, I'm going to talk about geese, but it is phenomenal, and it allows birds, variety of species, to fly in ways that's so efficient, but in extraordinary kind of distances and over extraordinary environments. A great example, I'm pretty sure a friend of the podcast, Dr. Lucy Hawkes, who I know, Steve, you know well, did an incredible study on bar-tailed geese over the Himalayas. And they have an amazing roller coaster behaviour of flight, which is perfectly efficient for travelling huge distances over extreme environments. I mean, it's the Himalayas, for goodness sake. But I guess a more simple example is, the iconic V formation of flight. And it doesn't just look good. It's not just like a pretty shape that we like to ooh and ah at as they come in at the end of the day at dusk. It's actually an aerodynamic masterpiece, because the way that they fly is all to do with efficiency. So how they position themselves, as you'd imagine, is kind of in the upward moving air of the wings of the bird in front of them. It also, if you've ever cycled behind your mate or ran behind your mate or swam behind a mate, you'll know that the drag is a lot easier, is a lot lower when you're behind that said individual in front of you. So it's great for reducing resistance and drag, and it's great for improving efficiency of flight by, actually, it's been shown by about 20 to 30%. It decreases that kind of energy expenditure. So it's perfect, and it allows them to make these huge, huge journeys. And when you're just watching geese, just nibbling away at the grass or in your local estuary, you don't really think much of it, but it is a masterpiece of aerodynamic cooperation.
I saw a lovely bit of computer modelling done on exactly what you're talking about. And there's an extra effect. So there is that drafting effect that anyone who is like you say, a cyclist, a runner, a swimmer, a kayaker will know well. But there's another added effect, which is that as the bird's wings circle, they create an area of dead air, and the next bird falls into that, and its wings also travel in that same area of dead air. So there's less resistance for the bird's wings as they're moving. And it's why you get those fantastic V formations in geese, and they are shifting the birds that are in the fore position, which has the most resistance, and the rear positions that have less resistance. It's absolutely extraordinary stuff.
Yeah. It's not just geese, though, that have incredible flight formations, is it?
Well, I wanted to talk about murmurations.
Oh,
so
yes.
Murmurations, which are of starlings, and we have some of the best in the world. I mean, Aberystwyth, kind of your neck of the woods, Lizzie, has one of the finest in the world. These gatherings classically in the autumn and in the early winter, where starlings will come together in their hundreds of thousands, and before they head into a roost, they'll come together in these phenomenal flying displays. It looks like smoke. It looks like a kind of ever-evolving cloud of birds, and they are moving in perfect synchronicity. And there's so much about this that is fascinating. I think the first reason is why, and it's often been suggested that it's a predator avoidance display, but then why does it only happen pre-heading into the roost? Another suggestion is it's like a come hither to other starlings. So you all gather together and you're like, right, come and join us for the roost we're heading to now. And they all go and roost together, and they get advantages in being able to spot predators from a distance and also keeping warm while they're all together. But the perhaps more interesting thing is how they do it. How does each individual starling in a group of tens of thousands manage to stay in formation? And this has been broken down now using machine learning to try and figure out how they do it. And scientists think that each individual bird has to keep track of the 7 birds that are most close to it. It has to keep a relatively set distance from that other bird, for the other 7 birds, and then it just has to keep on flying. And because of that, they all just move in this unbelievable, perfect, shimmering shape. I should also say the finest murmuration I have ever seen was over a service station off the M1. And
No way.
it was the most amazing thing about it was this incredible murmuration going on over my head. There was about 2 other people stood next to me, and hundreds of people just wandering in and out of Burger King, completely oblivious, just didn't even look up at this thing that was going on over their heads. I was kind of like, it's a murmuration of starlings, you heathens! But yeah, that's just nerdy me.
They were too busy concentrating on the murmuration of cars in front of them. It sounds like the same pattern.
I should say as well that there was a whole area of science that was devoted to working out whether murmurations of starlings were down to the birds having ESP.
Having ESP?
Extrasensory perception, having the ability to just
Yeah, we all
read their
just went blank.
minds, to read the minds of other birds around them.
I did not read your mind.
Yeah.
And I was like, what?
It was that was a real area of science. There is, though, a hypothesis called the selfish herd effect, which goes on to explain how individuals in a group, like a herd of animals or a school of fish or a murmuration of starlings, reduce their individual risk of predation by moving in this strategic positioning within a group. So we know that predators will tend to focus on individual animals. They tend to go for the weaker animal in a group if they possibly can. They always like the easy road if possible. It makes it much, much harder for them to do that. And it shows that you have far lesser risk of being predated on if you are in the center of a flock or a shoal, far more if you're on the outside. But if that's constantly shifting, then your overall risk of being scoffed decreases. And that is one said to be example. I mean, anyone who's been in a bait ball of fish where you get a diffuse shoal of fish, great big shoal of fish that can be thousands, millions of fish strong, and it comes together into a much more focused shape where they're all incredibly tight in together and they move like a mirror. In many ways, it's the equivalent of a murmuration just below the surface of the waves. You can see that shifting form, it makes it much, much harder for any of these big animals to focus on individuals. And if one individual gets separated off, it gets scoffed instantly. And so it does work, but simulating it and figuring out how each individual animal knows their place, that's the really exciting bit.
Yeah. I've always wondered about the function of a murmuration, just because I have seen other birds murmurate, those that perhaps aren't as at risk from predators. I remember also flying down the M5 and seeing lapwings murmurate, what looked like a murmuration. And I was like, I was also screaming my lungs out in the car as I whizzed past at 70 miles an hour. But it's just, that is an interesting question, just because it's not just limited to starlings or those that perhaps,
I have 2 questions there. First of all, is to murmurate a verb? If it's not, then it should be. And I would like you to take responsibility for that, Lizzie. You just come up with your own verb live on this podcast. Also,
I think it is.
Things like knot and dunlin and lapwings and other birds, is it a murmuration? I thought murmuration was specifically for starlings.
Murmurate can refer to 2 distinct things: the act of starlings forming a large coordinated flock, and the general term for a flock of birds.
thank you, Mr. Chat GPT. Or Miss.
Yeah.
You mentioned just before, Steve, you were talking very briefly about bait balls and the way that fish travel in those big schools. Well, I'm sure that you are both aware of those 2 million pound individual fish that weigh more than a polar bear that have turned back up in UK waters in the last few years. Have either of you attempted to go and swim with them yet? I'm sure you have.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Would love to.
I've tried. I've failed, but we managed to film bluefin tuna again in your neck of the woods, Lizzie, off the Celtic Deep with your pals down there. Off of Pembrokeshire, we filmed the tuna hammering bait balls, smashing up above the surface. You know, they're coming back to Devon, Dorset, Cornwall, and they are big. We've seen some stuff on social media and some. I mean, we filmed one from a drone looking down from above off the Inner Hebrides. Thought it was a basking shark because it was so big, and this fish must have been 3 meters long and was creating a wake at the surface as it was swimming. It was that big, unreal.
Oof.
So the cool thing about the way that fish travel in these great big groups, and especially big predatory fish that hunt in big groups like that, as you say, is they're easy to spot, especially from the surface when you see them jumping out. But they're also great indicators of changes in our oceans. So we did used to have bluefin tunas off our coastline, but they got overfished. So they disappeared in the 1960s and we stopped seeing them around the UK. The protection for bluefin tuna has changed, especially around the Mediterranean and around different areas of the world as well. With other Atlantic and Pacific bluefin tuna, we're aware that their lifespan's slightly different and their movement patterns are much, much larger than we ever realised in the first place. But they are now moving again. So we're seeing this pattern of our tuna moving northwards, and that's to find cooler temperature water. But of course, with the tuna, that probably also means that they're following other bait balls that are also moving at the same time. So I find them just really, really intriguing as a way to sort of study the health of our oceans, but also the changes that we're seeing too.
Yeah, one of the most famous, if you like, examples of that must be the herring spawning that's moving further and further north off of the Norwegian coast, starting in, further south than Tromsø. But, before people got wind of orcas and humpback whales and the amazing things you can do in the water filming them, it became popular then as they moved past the main city of Tromsø and now further north into areas up in the northern fjords and places like, what's the name of the town? Hello, she's gone.
Chervoy?
Thank you, Chervoy. Thank you. And just off the Lofton Islands. And speaking of kind of collective behaviour, which links beautifully from what you were talking about, Sarah, is of course, and I have to mention, is the cooperative behavioural feeding strategies of humpbacks there and the bubble net feeding. And it's something that I've seen in Alaska beautifully. And essentially, I'll kind of summarise it as quickly and as concisely as I can, but they'll all kind of dive down and one whale will start producing bubbles, and those bubbles, as they float to the surface, will essentially create almost a net. And that's not only kind of a visual barrier, it's a physical barrier to those bait balls or fish within that net. And then in a synchronized manner, all the whales will lunge feed to the surface and essentially capitalise on all that food resource. The best thing I've ever experienced has to be when a humpback whale, I think it was 2 individuals, so normally they can do it in whole groups where 4 or 5 strong even, but I had one encounter where 2 humpback whales used the side of our boat as almost like the side of the net. And as they came up to lunge feed, there was like a moment of quiet. And then all of a sudden, we saw all these herring jumping out of the surface. 2 massive mouths. You could literally see the barnacles and the ventral grooves on the underside of that mouth of the humpback whale as they lunge fed at the surface. And then all the scales shimmering as the aftermath. It was one of the best things I've ever seen. Steve, you've been up there loads, haven't you, in the Norwegian Arctic?
Yeah, both the Norwegian Arctic and over the other side on the Pacific as well, where you get those mass aggregations of bubble netting humpbacks. It's really very, very special. I think my greatest outtake that I've had in my entire career, which is still up on YouTube somewhere, if you look up kayaker near swallowed by humpback whales, is of me sea kayaking with Justine Evans, the superb camera operator. She was at the front of the kayak, I was at the back, and we were sat there. We'd been like 5 days filming the humpbacks. And then we saw a group of humpbacks approaching from one side and another group approaching from the other. It was one of those ethereally calm days where the water was like velvet, and they disappeared and they went, completely silent, all gone. And then that bubble ring that you've just described started with us dead in the center of it. So the ring of bubbles was around us, and then 15 40-ton humpback whales erupted up through the surface with their gullets billowing, water and herring going everywhere. When you look at the shots, particularly the wide shot slightly further back, they are towering 5-6 feet over the top of our 6 meters, over the top of our kayak. And it's the closest thing I've ever been to being actually swallowed by an animal, and the most overwhelming dramatic thing that's ever happened to me in my whole career. It was really quite something. And also that's one of those things where, cooperation, synchronicity is incredibly important. And that first whale that does the job of creating the bubble net and the sounds that come with it, these incredible trumpeting sounds that terrify the herring and force them to stay within that bubble net, there is a degree of altruism there. They're not going to get a feed, but they know that the next time there's a bubble net, they will be able to. And I've also seen something really, really cool with bait balls and a different kind of whale, the sei whale, which we filmed in the Azores. So we filmed these enormous bait balls that were coming together, and they were being fed on from everything from blue sharks to whale sharks to the whales, and particularly sei whales. The sei whale is kind of like a fin whale, sort of a smaller version of the blue whale, but obviously not quite so blue, sometimes called a sei whale. They're very long and thin, submarine-like in their movements. And we were filming them coming in and gulp feeding on big bait balls, and mostly doing it by drone, although we were underwater as well. And what you notice from the drone is that they approach at great speed. And when I say great speed, I'm probably talking about like 25, 30 miles an hour. They head into these bait balls, turn on their side, and then the bottom jaw drops, and it's like a balloon. They fill up with tons and tons of water and the bait ball. That huge engulfment of water means that they stop dead. So from, this really rapid approach, they are absolutely stopped, and then they just take the whole bait ball in one go, swallow it, and continue. But what we saw from the drone, which was really cool, was that there were envoys of dolphins at the snouts of the sei whales, which appeared to be leading them in towards the bait balls, that appeared to be targeting them, almost like they were a laser targeting device. And I would probably say that at least half, if not 3/4 of the approaches that we filmed from the drone, there would be dolphins at the snout of the sei whale, appearing to go, just follow me, just follow my flukes, I'm taking you right towards it. And the sei whale would engulf it, but then there are, thousands of other fish that are battered, confused, knocked off course, and the dolphins would come in and pick those up. Utterly exquisite, and cool. It would appear to be synchronicity in action.
That is such a cool example. So from cooperative flight to mass emergence and some incredible near-death experiences with Steve getting swallowed by a whale. That's all we've got time for today. Please send in your questions to questions@that'sjustwild.com and we'll get to it.
So we are a freshly hatched iguana of a show, so any support's really welcome. You can follow us on your favourite podcast app, leave us a review, it makes all the difference to the whole team. For ad-free listening, our newsletter, special deep dive episodes and members-only benefits, you can subscribe to us at that'sjustwild.com. Remember, we're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and you can find us at That's Just Wild Pod.